What's up, guys? I'm BTC. Moira has been out for a little bit, and while the character does seem to be in a pretty good place, there are still a bunch of bugs that range from the mildly annoying to the severely frustrating. So today, I'm gonna go over the top 5 bugs with Moira. Let's get started. Before we get into any of the current bugs, I want to show you one that you might not have realized was just recently fixed, and it has to do with the Mei ice wall. So what used to happen was whenever Moira would throw out one of the biotic orbs, it didn't matter if it was a healing orb or a damage orb, and it didn't matter if the Mei was friendly or enemy, any of the ice walls in the game would immediately destroy any of the biotic orbs as soon as they came into contact. Well, thankfully, that has been fixed, and now what ends up happening is the biotic orbs will simply pass right through the wall as if it wasn't there. Now, I think a better fix would have been to have the biotic orbs bounce off of the walls instead of simply passing through them. That would have given someone who's playing Mei a few more options as to how to deal with the biotic orbs. If it's a friendly one, they could try to keep it trapped in, or if it's an enemy one, they could try to keep it trapped out. But, hey, as long as they're not just completely disappearing, at least that's an improvement. Now, we're about to jump into the list, but if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe because I've got tons more awesome daily Overwatch content on the channel, so subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss any of it. Starting out at number 5, there's no visual indicator that Moira is attacking an enemy shield. Now, this is definitely on the minor annoyance end of the spectrum, but it's still just that, an annoyance. So what I'm talking about is whenever Moira is trying to deal damage to an enemy barrier, doesn't matter if it's Reinhardt, Orisa, Winston, or even Symmetra when she throws out one of her barriers. When Moira is dealing damage to the barrier, it doesn't actually show that she's dealing any damage. So you'll see Moira holding her hand up as if she's trying to deal damage, but there's no beam. The only time a beam will show up is if an enemy is directly behind the barrier that Moira is attacking. This is a little problematic because no one except for you knows that you're actually dealing damage to the barrier. The enemy Reinhardt will see that it's going down, but he doesn't necessarily know where it's coming from because there's no beam showing that his barrier is being attacked. Number 4. Moira's primary damaging attack, the Biotic Grasp, will place a ridiculously high priority on objects instead of other players. So characters like Junkrat or Symmetra or even Orisa, who can place objects into the game environment, those objects will have a significantly higher priority for the targeting of Biotic Grasp than the player themselves. There is one exception, and that's Torbjorn, but we'll come back to that a little bit later. So as you can see, whenever Junkrat throws a steel trap or one of his remotes onto the ground, you'll notice that the Biotic Grasp will try to target those first instead of the character. Even though the crosshair for Moira is clearly on Junkrat and not on his steel trap or the remote, the Biotic Grasp will still try to damage those objects first. So it looks like the hitbox for all of that stuff is just gigantic, and then the Biotic Grasp will target those instead. And it's not just for Junkrat either. It works for almost anything that can be placed down. So things like Orisa's Supercharger, or Symmetra's turrets, or her teleporter. Almost anything that a character can place into the environment will be targeted with a higher priority than the character themselves. Again, one exception with Torbjorn, we'll get back to that. Number 3. You cannot fade through enemy players. So Fade is essentially a supercharged version of Reaper's Wraith form. And during Wraith form, you can use it to pass through any other player in the game, including enemies, which is something that you normally can't do. However, with Moira's Fade, right now you're not able to actually get through any of the enemy players. Instead, you kind of bounce off of them or treat them as if they're a solid object. Blizzard has confirmed that this is a bug, and they are working on a fix. Number 2. Biotic Grasp targeting the payload and certain other destructibles. So this is kind of similar to what I said in number 4, which is there are certain objects that will get a higher priority than the enemy players when it comes to Moira's Biotic Grasp. Now, the difference between this and the other ones is that when you're attacking an enemy and the Junkrat throws down a steel trap, you can destroy the steel trap and then continue attacking the enemy. But with this issue, you cannot destroy the payload ever, and that's why this is a much more severe problem. So, as you can see from the footage here, you can have your crosshair on the enemy, but the targeting of Biotic Grasp, for some reason, gets locked into the payload itself. There also is another smaller issue with this as well. I found that if there are certain destructibles like fences, they can actually get in the way and cause the Biotic Grasp to lock onto them as well. Now, with the fences and other destructibles, you can just run up and quick melee them to get rid of them. But the fact still remains that the Biotic Grasp should not be targeting or locking onto these fences. Or, if it can, at a minimum, they should make it so that the Biotic Grasp can actually destroy them. And coming in at number 1, Moira cannot attack a Torbjorn turret. Now, this is really strange because it functions the exact opposite of how some of the other stuff works. For example, when I showed you a Junkrat throwing down a steel trap, the Moira Biotic Grasp prioritized that steel trap above everything else. Even when the crosshair was on the Junkrat, it still tried to attack the trap instead. But with Torbjorn and his turret, it just doesn't do that. Instead, it pretends like the turret just simply doesn't exist. As you can see, I'm able to attack the Torbjorn who is standing right behind the turret, and it deals absolutely no damage to the turret, and instead will get rid of the Torbjorn. Now, you can run up right next to it, hold right click, and it will do absolutely nothing. Now, while some characters might be stronger or weaker versus an enemy turret, in the case of Moira, she is essentially powerless as she can deal no damage to the turret using her main attacks. So this is a pretty severe issue, but I suppose what's more frustrating about it is that this was a known bug that was on the PTR prior to Moira ever getting pushed to the live versions of the server. Blizzard knew that it existed, they knew that it was there, and yet they pushed the character to the live version of the server without it getting fixed. There is a little bit of a silver lining though, because some of these issues might be resolved on the live servers pretty soon. Just recently, Bill Warnecki, who is the lead software engineer for Overwatch, said this: "These bugs are deceptively complex. The result of fixing another more critical Moira issue exposed the bugs you're seeing now live on 1.17, the current version of the game. We did fix these problems in the 1.18 release, which is on the PTR right now. The complexity and scope of changes to some deep down gameplay code was overall safer to do where they could have some time on the PTR. So if all goes well, some of this should be resolved pretty soon." What do you guys think about all of these issues? Have you run into any bugs that weren't mentioned here? Let me know in the comments. Also, don't forget to check out my Discord server. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram. The links for that stuff are down below. Thanks for watching. Remember, always blame the controller, because it's never your fault. Also, special thanks to all my Patreon supporters for helping to make this all possible. If you'd like to see what kind of cool rewards you can get for supporting the channel, check the links on screen and down below.